Unveiled Mysteries by Godfre Ray King. Dedication. This series of books is dedicated in deepest eternal love and gratitude to our beloved Master Saint Germain, the Great White Brotherhood, the Brotherhood of the Royal Teton, the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, and those other ascended masters whose loving help has been direct and without limit. Editor's Note. At the request of the ascended Master Saint Germain and Victory, the Tall Master from Venus, the material in this book is written in a plain, direct manner, with no attempt to conform to artificial literary standards or outer world's authority. They said this series of books must go forth in a simple, modern style, which the layman can easily understand. Therefore, the inner light and feeling have been held as of the first importance in presenting this truth, and the words used to express that light and feeling are those which are most direct and of easiest comprehension for the reader. The ascended masters never use involved terminology, regardless of any human opinion, for the nearer one comes to eternal truth, the more direct and concise is the language in which it is clothed. In presenting this book to our readers, we have kept the light and feeling first, and the literary form entirely secondary. The material in the first two books is simply a record of the author's experiences in the order in which the events occurred, stated as clearly as possible and in words that convey to the reader the feeling of the experiences. If the reader will bear this in mind, he too will be able to receive the outpouring of light, which will open opportunities for similar transcendent experiences to come to him in a perfectly normal, safe, harmonious manner for his permanent blessing and illumination. In loving service to the light, Lotus Ray King. Tribute. The time has arrived when the great wisdom held and guarded for many centuries in the Far East is now to come forth in America, at the command of those great ascended masters who direct, protect, and assist in expanding the light within mankind upon this earth. The great ascended Master Saint Germain, throughout this series of books, is one of those powerful cosmic beings from the great host of ascended masters who govern this planet. He is the same great masterful presence who worked at the court of France previous to and during the French Revolution, and whose advice, if it had been heeded, would have saved great suffering. He is indissolubly linked with America, past, present, and future, for a very important part of his work upon this earth is the purifying, protecting, and illumining of the people of America, that she may be the carrier of the cup of light to the nations of the earth in the golden age that is opening before us. America's very freedom in the beginning of her existence was due largely to his tireless efforts in protecting and encouraging those responsible for her inception. The drafting of the Declaration of Independence was also a direct result of his help and influence, and it was his love, protection, and guidance which sustained Washington and Lincoln during the darkest hours of their lives. This beloved brother of humanity, who works untiringly for its light and freedom, is even now, during the present hour in America, working in the world of governmental affairs and bringing about certain beneficial changes that will bless her, and through her, the world. Not for many years ahead will the people of America and the earth know how much of their good they owe to this great ascended Master, to whom it is impossible to do full justice, except in deepest love, obedience, and service to the ideal for which he stands and unceasingly labors. This intimate knowledge of his activities in our country makes possible a feeling of close contact and love for him that becomes a living, tangible force in the life of the reader. The The radiation of this book is such as can only be given by an ascended master, who in this case is the great beloved bearer of the light, Saint Germain. Godfre, Ray King. Foreword. It was through Saint Germain's assistance that I was privileged to have the experiences recorded in this series of books, and permission has been granted for them to be put in a form which can be given to the public. No one can realize, unless he too has had similar assistance, how great and eternal is my love and gratitude to him and those other ascended masters whose assistance I had. With the exception of Saint Germain, the real names of the ascended masters, exact locations, records, dates, and treasure herein described, are withheld intentionally, at his command, for reasons that are obvious, because only by the service of love and invitation from the ascended masters is the right earned to be with them in visible, tangible, living, breathing bodies. Any other way of approach is bound to meet with disappointment and failure, for the great presence and power which has guarded through the centuries guards them still. One's own inner purity, strength, and attainment are the only passports by which one enters into these activities and association with the ascended masters comes about. When an individual, by conscious self-correction of his weaknesses, reaches a certain point, nothing in the universe can keep him from them. In America, there is one of the most ancient foci of the great White Brotherhood, one of the oldest retreats of the ascended masters, which has been working for man's freedom since his advent upon this planet. Some of the activities within this retreat are revealed to the reader that he may, if he be ready, make conscious contact through his own inner light with the greater light pouring out through this powerful center of God radiance, and thereby drink once again at the fountain of the ancient wisdom and carry the crystal cup of peace, love, and strength, and victory to his weary brothers. The purpose of putting this book into the hands of the public is to convey to the individual the encouragement and strength that will lift and sustain him through the transition period we are now in, and reveal something of the sane and sound foundation upon which the future of our country and the coming age is, this hour, being built. This book is written in the embrace of the majestic, towering presence of Mount Shasta, whose apex is robed forever in that pure, glistening white, the symbol of the light of eternity. Its pages are a record of the way by which I was brought in touch with the beloved Master, Saint Germain, and those other great ascended masters who labor ceaselessly to assist the humanity of this earth as it struggles on the path to peace, love, light, and everlasting perfection. I, whose experience it was, held steadfastly to a great, dominant desire from within, to see, to hear, and to know infallibly the truth of life. I was led step by step to realize and to accept the mighty God-presence within my own being, the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, the Christ. A way to make contact with the light, its all-knowing omnipresence and unerring activity was revealed to me, and I give it to the reader in these pages. I can record only a part of the events that took place and the instruction I received. One by one, my great desires have been fulfilled, because those desires were constructive and unselfish. My quest for truth and happiness has been long and steady, but I have found both, and no human being can take them from me, because they are eternal and come from my own great God-self. In presenting this experience, it is with the deepest prayer that the reader may receive the light, be blessed and prospered on his way, as he walks the path of truth, in which alone can permanent happiness be found, There, and there only, will the seeker after light find eternal peace and activity in the service of love. In my present effort in sending these books forth into the world, can carry some of the love, light, and happiness I have received. To those of earth who also have been seeking the light, I shall have been amply rewarded. The great ascended Master Saint Germain has told us that the books of the Saint Germain series in the Ascended Master's Octave of Light are bound in covers of jewels. They contain the eternal law of life, and will remain the law for humanity and the earth for thousands of years to come. The Ascended Master Law of the I Am is the only way provided by life to raise the activity of human beings into the next octave of life beyond the human. It is the only way by which individuals can correct the mistakes of the past and go forward free from them in the future. It is the means the law of life provides which enables the individual to give a balance back to the universal for his misuse of life's energy, instead of making restitution individual to individual, which would become an endless chain of reactions. That provision for bringing balance everywhere is surely the greatest mercy of life to its creation. It is the grace Jesus taught, and by which he gained his ascension. All ascended masters, and there are thousands of them, have used exactly this same application to become the perfection and power of life which they are now. In reading this series of books, you are trying to understand that which is expressing infinitely greater perfection than you or other human beings of this earth are expressing. There are no discrepancies in this explanation of the law as the Ascended Masters have given it. They are wholly pure, perfect, all-powerful beings who never make a mistake. The one who reads these books should realize how little he or she knows about what is in this magnificent universe beside himself, and of which he has never heard. Everyone knows positively that there is an intelligent power and activity of life greater than his own human mind, body, and intellect, or those of all mankind put together. Everyone knows that our world and the system of worlds to which this earth belongs were created, designed, and are sustained by an intelligence and power greater than all human intellects and consciousness on our planet. Then, instead of feeling, saying, or thinking that there are discrepancies in this Ascended Master instruction, which is perfect, try to realize how little your human intellect or that of all mankind knows about perfection. Why should human beings who are in such limitation and who make so many mistakes themselves dare to say that the Ascended Masters, who are wholly perfect and pure and loving and all-powerful, make mistakes when such a thing is impossible? Such an attitude is just human ignorance, judging the divine life and manifestation of the universe through the discord of human feeling in its rebellion against obedience to the law of life. The Ascended Masters and we never use a destructive force. We do not need to. All destructively qualified energy is the tool of the sinister force in rebellious individuals who will not give obedience to the law of their own life for their own greater good. The power and victory of light is taking its dominion in the United States of America, because the Ascended Masters and cosmic beings have issued a fiat for the perfection of life to express fully through the people of this earth. That perfection begins in America, by the Ascended Master's understanding and conscious use of the great creative word, I am. All who will use that word as the Ascended Masters use it will release the same all-powerful victory and perfection of the light that they do, because they are its full power and perfection. They became its full power and perfection by using it. All can do exactly the same thing and become perfect and all-powerful too. The saying that truth is stranger than fiction applies to this book. It is for the reader to accept or reject as he chooses, but the ascended masters whose help I have received have said to me often, the more humanity can accept our presence, the wider it opens the door for us to pour greater and greater help to them. But the rejection of us by those who do not agree with this truth does not remove us or change its activity in the universe. Those who do accept the truth herein recorded will find a new and powerful force entering their lives. Each copy carries with it this mighty presence, its radiation and sustaining power. All who study these pages honestly, deeply, sincerely, and persistently will know and make contact with the reality of that presence and power. To those who read this book, I wish to say that these experiences are as real and true as mankind's existence on this earth today, and that they all occurred during August, September, and October of 1930 upon Mount Shasta, California, USA. Godfre Ray King. The Ascension by Sahara. I feel my God flame touch my brow, the breath of love eternal now. I raise my eyes and lo, I see my own great God-self over me. A dazzling cloud envelops all. I hear my own God-presence call. I feel a surge of love's great might. I enter deep its breath, its light. I see within this pulsing flame. I listen and hear my secret name. I feel the glow, the great flame breath. I am the victor over death. I stand forth free, ascended now. To my heart's light all things do bow. I am a being of cause alone, and that cause love, the sacred tone. I pour out life, I lift, I raise. My heart o'erflows and sings its praise. My power strengthens and inspires. My great light rays are God's own fires. I am a sun. My love, its light. All else grows dim, earth lost to sight. I know that I am God, the One, the Source, the great, great central Sun. Unveiled Mysteries. Chapter 1. Meeting the Master. Mount Shasta stood out boldly against the western sky, surrounded at its base by a growth of pine and fir trees that made it look like a jewel of diamond-shining whiteness held in a filigree setting of green. Its snow-covered peaks glistened and changed color from moment to moment as the shadows lengthened in the sun's descent toward the horizon. Rumor said there was a group of men, divine men in fact, called the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, who formed a branch of the Great White Lodge, and that this focus from very ancient times had continued unbroken down to the present day. I had been sent on government business to a little town situated at the foot of the mountain, and while thus engaged occupied my leisure time trying to unravel this rumor concerning the Brotherhood. I knew through travels in the Far East that most rumors, myths, and legends have, somewhere as their origin, a deep underlying truth that usually remains unrecognized by all but those who are real students of life. I fell in love with Shasta, and each morning, almost involuntarily, saluted the spirit of the mountain and the members of the order. I sensed something very unusual about the entire locality, and in the light of the experiences that followed, I do not wonder that some of them cast their shadows before. Long hikes on the trail had become my habit whenever I wanted to think things out alone or make decisions of serious import. Here, on this great giant of nature, I found recreation, inspiration, and peace that soothed my soul and invigorated mind and body. I had planned such a hike for pleasure, as I thought, to spend some time deep in the heart of the mountain, when the following experience entered my life, to change it so completely that I could almost believe I were on another planet, but for my return to the usual routine in which I had been engaged for months. The morning in question, I started out at daybreak, deciding to follow where fancy led, and in a vague sort of way asked God to direct my path. By noon, I had climbed high up on the side of the mountain, where the view to the south was beautiful as a dream. As the day advanced, it grew very warm, and I stopped frequently to rest and to enjoy to the full the remarkable stretch of country around the McLeod River, valley, and town. It came time for lunch, and I sought a mountain spring for clear, cold water. Cup in hand, I bent down to fill it, when an electrical current passed through my body from head to foot. I looked around, and directly behind me stood a young man who, at first glance, seemed to be someone on a hike like myself. I looked more closely, and realized immediately that he was no ordinary person. As this thought passed through my mind, he smiled, and addressed me, saying, "My brother, if you will hand me your cup, I will give you a much more refreshing drink than spring water." I obeyed, and instantly the cup was filled with a creamy liquid. Handing it back to me, he said, "Drink it." I did so, and must have looked my astonishment. While the taste was delicious, the electrical, vivifying effect in my mind and body made me gasp with surprise. I did not see him put anything into the cup, and I wondered what was happening. "That which you drank," he explained, "comes directly from the universal supply, pure and vivifying as life itself. In fact, it is life, omnipresent life, for it exists everywhere about us. It is subject to our conscious control and direction, willingly obedient, when we love enough, because all the universe obeys the behest of love. Whatsoever I desire manifests itself when I command in love. I held out the cup, and that which I desired for you appeared. See, I have but to hold out my hand, and if I wish to use gold, gold is here." Instantly there lay in his palm a disk about the size of a $10 gold piece. Again he continued, "I see within you a certain inner understanding of the great law, but you are not outwardly aware of it enough to produce that which you desire direct from the omnipresent universal supply. You have desired to see something of this kind so intensely, so honestly, and so determinedly. It could no longer be withheld from you. However, precipitation is one of the least important activities of the great truth of being. If your desire had not been free from selfishness and the fascination of phenomena, such an experience could not have come to you. When leaving home this morning, you thought you were coming on a hike, that is, so far as the outer activity of your mind was concerned. In the deeper, larger sense, you were really following the urge of your inner God-self, that led to the person, place, and condition wherein your most intense desire could be fulfilled. The truth of life is, you cannot desire that which is not possible of manifestation somewhere in the universe. The more intense the feeling within the desire, the more quickly it will be attained. However, if one be foolish enough to desire something that will injure another of God's children, or any other part of his creation, then that person will pay the penalty in discord and failure somewhere in his own life's experience. It is very important to realize fully that God's intent for every one of his children is abundance of every good and perfect thing. He created perfection and endowed his children with exactly the same power. They can create and maintain perfection also, and express God's dominion over the earth and all that is therein. Mankind was originally created in the image and likeness of God. The only reason all do not manifest dominion is because they do not use their divine authority, that with which each individual is endowed and by which he is intended to govern his world. Thus, they are not obeying the law of love by pouring out peace and blessing to all creation. This comes about through their failure to accept and acknowledge themselves as temples of the Most High Living God, and to hold this acknowledgement with eternal recognition. Humanity, in its present seeming limitation of time, space, and activity, is in the same condition a person in need would be, to whom someone held out a handful of money. If the needy one did not step forward and accept the money held out to him, how in the world could he ever have the benefit which it could bring? The mass of mankind is exactly in this state of consciousness today, and will continue in it until they accept the God within their hearts as the owner, giver, and doer of all the good that has ever come into their lives and world. The personal self of every individual must acknowledge completely and unconditionally that the human or outer activity of consciousness has absolutely nothing of its own. Even the energy by which one recognizes the great God within is radiated into the personal self by the great God self. Love and praise of the great God self within, and the attention maintained focused upon truth, health, freedom, peace, supply, or any other thing that you may desire for right use, persistently held in your conscious thought and feeling, will bring them into your use and world as surely as there is a great law of magnetic attraction in the universe. The eternal law of life is what you think and feel you bring into form. Where your thought is, there you are, for you are your consciousness, and what you meditate upon, you become. When one allows his mind to dwell upon thoughts of hate, condemnation, lust, envy, jealousy, criticism, fear, doubt, or suspicion, and allows these feelings of irritation to generate within him, he will certainly have discord, failure, and disaster in his mind, body, and world. As long as he persists in allowing his attention to be held by such thoughts, whether they be about nations, persons, places, conditions, or things, he is absorbing those activities into the substance of his mind, his body, and his affairs. In fact, he is compelling, forcing them into his experience. All these discordant activities reach the individual and his world through his thought and feeling. Feeling often flashes before one is aware of the thought in the outer consciousness, which he might use to control it. And this kind of experience should teach him how great is the energy within his many creations, which has accumulated through habit. The feeling activity of life is the most unguarded point of human consciousness. It is the accumulative energy by which thoughts are propelled into the atomic substance, and thus thoughts become things. I tell you, the need of guarding the feeling cannot be emphasized too strongly, for control of the emotions plays the most important part of anything in life, in maintaining balance in the mind, health in the body, success and accomplishment in the affairs and world of the personal self of every individual. Thoughts can never become things until they are clothed with feeling. The Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit, is the feeling side of life, God, the activity of divine love, or the mother expression of deity. This is why the sin against the Holy Ghost is referred to as that which brings such great distress, because any discord in the feeling breaks the law of love, which is the law of balance, harmony, and perfection. The greatest crime in the universe against the law of love is mankind's almost ceaseless sending forth of every kind of irritable and destructive feeling. One day the race will come to realize and recognize that the sinister destructive forces manifesting on this earth and in its atmosphere, generated, mark you, by human thought and feeling, have only entered the affairs of individuals or nations through lack of control in the emotions in everyone's daily personal experience. Even destructive thoughts cannot express themselves as action, events, or become physical things, except by passing through the world of feeling. For it is in this phase of manifestation that the activity of coalescing the physical atom upon thought forms takes place. As the noise from a sudden explosion shocks the nervous system of one who hears it, setting up a trembling sensation in the cellular structure of the body, in exactly the same way do the flares of irritated feeling shock, disturb, and disarrange the finer substance and the atomic structure of the mind, body, and world of the person who sends them out, consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. Discordant feeling is the producer of conditions we call disintegration, old age, lack of memory, and every other failure in the world of human experience. The effect upon the body structure is the same as that produced upon a building if the mortar holding the bricks together were to receive repeated shocks, and each day those were to be increased. This continued shock would shake apart the particles composing the mortar, the building would collapse into a chaotic mass, and the form be no more. That is what mankind is constantly doing to the atomic structure of the human body. To give expression to the discordant thoughts and feelings in one's self is the course of least resistance and the habitual activity of the undeveloped, undisciplined, and willful individual who refuses to understand the law of his own being, and to bring the personal self, which is but his instrument of expression, into obedience to that law. He who cannot or will not control his thoughts and feelings is in a bad way, for every door of his consciousness is wide open to the disintegrating activities thrown off by the minds and emotions of other personalities. It takes neither strength, wisdom, nor training to give way to unkind destructive impulses, and the full-grown human beings who do this are but children in their development of self-control. It is a blight upon the life of mankind that so little control of the emotions is taught humanity from the cradle to the grave. Attention to this particular point is the greatest need in the Western world today. It is easy to give way to discordant thoughts, feelings, and activities, because the mass of mankind are submerged, as it were, by environment and association entirely created by themselves. The individual, through his control of the outer consciousness, must make the effort to rise out of this condition by his own free will, in order to transcend these limitations permanently. And no one can hope to rid his life and world of misery, discord, and destruction until he leashes his own thought and feeling. In this way, he refuses to let the life flowing through his mind and body become qualified by the discord resulting from every little disturbing occurrence in the world about him. At first, such discipline does require determined, continuous effort, for the thoughts and feelings of 95% of humanity run as uncontrolled and free as a little tramp dog. However, no matter how much effort it takes to bring these two activities under control, it is worth any amount of time, energy, and effort, and no real, permanent dominion of one's life and world can take place without it. It will be my pleasure and privilege to teach you the use of these higher laws. Their application and use will enable you to release true wisdom and bring about all perfection. The first step to the control of yourself is the stilling of all outer activity of both mind and body. 15 to 30 minutes at night before retiring and in the morning before beginning the day's work, using the following exercise, will do wonders for anyone who will make the necessary effort. For the second step, make certain of being undisturbed, and after becoming very still, picture and feel your body enveloped in a dazzling white light. The first 5 minutes while holding this picture, recognize and feel intensely the connection between the outer self and your great, mighty God within, focusing your attention upon the heart center and visualizing it as a golden sun. The next step is the acknowledgement. I now joyously accept the fullness of the mighty God presence, the pure Christ. Feel the great brilliancy of the light, and intensify it in every cell of your body for at least 10 minutes longer. Then close the meditation by the command, I am a child of the light. I love the light. I serve the light. I live in the light. I am protected, illumined, supplied, sustained by the light, and I bless the light. Remember always, one becomes that upon which he meditates. And since all things have come forth from the light, light is the supreme perfection and control of all things. Contemplation and adoration of the light compels illumination to take place in the mind, health, strength, and order to come into the body, and peace, harmony, and success to manifest in the affairs of every individual who will really do it, and seeks to maintain it. All the way down the centuries, in every age, under every condition, we are told by all who have expressed the greater accomplishments of life that the light is supreme. The light is everywhere, and in the light exist all things. That truth is just as true today as it was 1,000,000 years ago. As far back as there is any record of humanity, the wise and great ones of all ages are portrayed with a radiation of light about them, emanating from the head and body of each. This light is real, just as real as the electric lights in your homes. The day is not far distant when machines will be constructed to reveal the emanations of light about every individual to the physical sight of anyone who cares to observe it. Such a machine will also show the contamination or discoloration that becomes a cloud around the light of God, which the personal self generates through discordant thought and feeling. This and this only is the way by which the energy of the great life stream is misused and wrongly qualified. If you will practice this exercise faithfully and feel it in every atom of your mind and body, with deep, deep intensity, you will receive abundant proof of the tremendous activity, power, and perfection that abides and is forever active within the light. When you have experienced this for even a short time, you will need no further proof. You become your own proof. The light is the kingdom. Enter into it and be at peace. Return to the Father's house. After the first 10 days of using this exercise, it is well to do it 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. We often hear the complaint, "Oh, I cannot give all that time." To any who are of that opinion, I wish to say simply this: the time the average person spends in criticizing, condemning, and blaming people, conditions, and things for not being something other than they are, if occupied with this recognition and use of the light, will make heaven manifest on earth for the individual who dares to try, and has determination enough to maintain it. Nothing is impossible. The light never fails. The light is God's way of creating and maintaining order, peace, and perfection throughout His creation. Every human being on this earth can have all the time he wants in which to do this, when his desire to do it is intense enough. The intensity in the desire itself will reorder the world of people, conditions, and things, so as to provide that time if he earnestly wished to use it for his upward climb. No person in the world is an exception to that law, for the intense desire to do anything constructive, when it becomes intense enough, is the God power that releases the energy necessary to create and express the thing desired. Everyone has the same supreme privilege of contact with the all-powerful presence of God, and it is the only power that ever did, does now, or ever will raise the personal self and its world above earthly discord and limitation. My beloved son, try this with great determination, and know God in you is your certain victory. As his discourse ended, I began to realize that he must be one of the ascended masters, for he had not only given me proof of his dominion over the elements by precipitation, but had instructed and explained as he did it. I sat wondering how it was that he knew me. "My son," he said, answering my thought at once, "I have known you for aeons. In raising your thought by your own conscious effort, it made my coming to you possible at this time. While I have always been in touch with you, when we were both in our finer bodies, your conscious effort of reaching out to some one of the ascended masters opened the way for me to come to you in a much more tangible way, that is tangible to your physical senses. I see you do not quite recognize me in your outer consciousness. I was present during your birth, at your mother's passing, and was instrumental in bringing you and Lotus together at the right time, that your attainment might not be delayed. Again, I assisted in bringing you and your son into association in this embodiment. However, be patient. Sit still a few moments. Watch me closely, and I will reveal my identity to you." I did as he requested, and in perhaps a full minute I saw his face, body, and clothing become the living, breathing, tangible presence of the Master Saint Germain. Smiling at my astonishment and enjoying my surprise, he stood there before me, a magnificent godlike figure, in a white jeweled robe, a light and love sparkling in his eyes that revealed and proved the dominion and mastery that are his. "This," he explained, "is the body in which I work a great deal of the time when occupied with the welfare of mankind, unless the work I am doing at the moment requires closer contact with the outer world of affairs, and in that case I make my body take on the characteristics and dress of the nation with which I am working at the moment." "Oh," I exclaimed, "now I know you, for I have seen you many times like that, at the inner levels of consciousness." "My son," he explained, "do you not see what real mastery actually is? We in the ascended state can control the atomic structure of our world as a potter controls his clay. Every electron and atom in the universe is obedient to our desire and command, because of the God power by which we control it, and of which we have earned the right to be the directors. Mankind in the unascended state marvels at these things, but I tell you, it is no more effort for us to change the appearance and activity of our bodies than it is for the ordinary human being to change his clothes. The unfortunate condition in human consciousness that keeps individuals in their self-created limitations is their attitude of mind, which either fears or ridicules what it does not understand, or what is still worse, in its ignorance says that is impossible. A thing may not be probable under certain human conditions, but the God Self, which is the great light, can change all human conditions, so nothing is impossible. Every individual has the divine flame of life within him, and that God Self of him has dominion wherever he moves in the universe. If he, because of his own mental inertia, will not exert the necessary effort to reorder his age-old habits of mind and body, he goes on bound by the chains of his own forging. But if he choose to know the God within himself, and dares to give that God Self all control of his outer activities, he will receive the knowledge once more of his dominion over all substance, which has been his from the beginning. The time has arrived when many of humanity are rapidly awakening, and they must in some way be made to understand that they have lived again and again in hundreds, sometimes thousands, of lives, each time in a new physical body. The law of re-embodiment is the activity in human growth that gives the individual an opportunity to re-establish a balance in conditions that he has consciously caused to be thrown out of balance. It is but one activity of the law of compensation, cause and effect, or what might be called an automatic balancing process, governing all forces everywhere in the universe. The right understanding of this law gives one the explanation of many conditions in human experience, which otherwise seem wholly unjust. It is the only logical explanation for the infinite complexities and experiences of human creation, and reveals the operation and the law upon which all manifestation rests. It makes one know that there is no such thing as chance or accident. All is under direct, exact, and perfect law. Every experience of consciousness has a former cause, and everything at the same instant is the cause of a future effect. If a man has injured a woman in one life, he is certain to be reincarnated in a feminine form and pass through a similar experience until he realizes and experiences that which he has caused another to endure. The same thing is true if a woman be unjust or injures a man. This is the only way by which one is compelled, or rather compels himself, to experience both the cause and effect of everything which he generates in the world. The individual can create and experience whatsoever he will in his own world, but if he choose to do that which causes others to experience discord, then he compels himself to go through a similar condition until he understands what the effect of his own creation is upon the rest of the life of the universe. Come with me, and let us review the physical life in which you used a feminine form in France, wherein you were a singer of splendid accomplishment, with a voice of rare beauty and power. Immediately, without the least effort on my part, I stood outside my physical body, seeing it clearly as it reposed upon the ground. I wondered if it would be safe there on the mountainside, and in answer to my thoughts, Saint Germain replied, "Do not be disturbed. Not a thing in the world can harm your body while we are away. Observe." Instantly, I saw it surrounded by a white flame, forming a circle about 50 feet in diameter. Placed his right arm around me, and I saw we were rising rapidly from the ground. But I soon became adjusted to his vibratory action. There was no definite feeling of motion through space. But presently we looked down upon a village in the south of France. And he continued, "Here you were born as an only child, the daughter of a beautiful woman, whose life was an example of idealism far in advance of the majority in that period. Your father was a devoted husband and companion, highly cultured, and inspired by the early Christian spirit. The atmospheric ether of every environment records all that has ever transpired in that locality. I will revivify these etheric records, and you shall see living pictures giving every detail of your life. You sang at the church of this village, and studied with a teacher who persuaded your parents to let her give you training. You made rapid progress, and then received still greater advantages when they moved to Paris. After a year of intensive study, an opportunity came to sing before the Queen of France, and through her patronage you had appearances at many of her salons. This assured you a successful musical career. France and success lavished their gifts upon you for the next 5 years, and you accumulated much wealth. Suddenly, both parents passed through the change called death, and the shock to you was very great, followed by many weeks of serious illness. When you recovered and returned again to concert work, a new sympathetic quality had come into your voice through the recent experience of grief. A man who had guided much of your musical study became director of your public work, and you came to depend upon him as one who seemed worthy of trust. Then followed 14 years of brilliant success, at the end of which you became suddenly ill and passed on within a week. Your jewels and wealth were left in care of the director, to be used to help others, and to fulfill certain plans for which you had worked all your life. The last rites were no sooner over than a complete change took place within him. Greed took possession entirely. Now I shall show you that man whom you met some years ago here in America in your present life. The incident in business, I am quite sure, you will remember clearly. Here he showed me a business association in which I had tried to help several people while in the West some 10 years previously, in connection with a representative from the Belgian government. That man, he continued, was given a chance here to right the wrong he did you in France. He was shown the condition, and knew full well the situation, for we showed it to him. But he was not yet strong enough to permit the working out of the great cosmic law of justice and balance that debt. If he had done so of his own volition, it would have given him freedom in many ways, and enabled him to have progressed much more rapidly in this embodiment. Thus does the outer life keep the individual bound to the wheel of necessity, rebirth, continued struggle, and pain, until we let the light of the Christ within illumine and purify us, that we may respond only to the plan of God, love, peace, and perfection for His creation. This is the kind of lesson one never forgets, because objective teaching records the experience in the vision as well as in the mind. The record in the sight is deeper and necessarily receives more attention from the outer activity of the intellect. The essence of that long-forgotten experience certainly fixed itself in my memory permanently, for I can recall every detail of it to this day, as clearly as when I observed it with him. Now, he went on, let us recall another of your embodiments, one that you had in Egypt. We rose from the earth and moved rapidly forward. I was very conscious of the Mediterranean as we passed over its beautiful waters. We went on to Karnak and Luxor, then came again into contact with the earth. Watch closely, he said. This record is of a very ancient temple in Luxor, not among those whose ruins the archaeologists are exploring today, but one antedating any that have been discovered so far. If they knew where to look, they would find magnificent temples in a state of almost perfect preservation. Indicating a certain spot filled with ruins, which is all that travelers can see today, the scene became replaced by the activity in the ether, as it had originally been in all its beauty and splendor, far more magnificent than anything of which the present generation has any concept. The gardens and pools were surrounded by great pillars of white marble and rose granite. The entire locality became living, real, vibrant, and just as tangible as any physical city on earth today. It was so perfectly natural and normal that I asked how he made these experiences so vivid. Man and his creations, he replied, as well as nature, have an etheric counterpart, a pattern which makes its eternal impression upon the atmosphere about him wherever he goes. The pattern of the individual's activity and life experience is within his own aura all the time. A similar record exists in the aura of every locality. An ascended master may, if he choose, revivify or reclothe the individual's record of former activities wherever that person happens to be, for the pattern upon which the master coalesces the atomic structure is always in the aura of that individual. When the master reclothes the record of a locality, he must do it in the same specific place, for such a record, when reclothed, becomes the same living form and structure that it was when first built in physical substance. In this way it is possible to coalesce again the physical structure of entire buildings and their surroundings, when the ascended master so desires, for the accomplishment of some good purpose. When one has attained this God-given dominion, he can and does reclothe and reanimate any etheric record he desires to make visible for the instruction and benefit of students and others. When he does this, it is as real as reality itself, and the reclothed objects can be photographed, handled, and made physically tangible to the physical senses of the one observing them. Notice, he reminded me, you are experiencing these activities in your finer body, but they are nonetheless real because of that, for your physical body is only a garment which you, the self-conscious thinking and experiencing individual, wear. It is the same as though you wore a heavy overcoat in the cold winter atmosphere and only a light suit of clothes on a very warm summer day. Experiences in your light suit of clothes would surely be no less real than those you lived through in your heavy overcoat. I call this to your attention that you may understand the fuller and less limited activities of life. We examined the grounds and surrounding country and architecture. "Come, let us enter," he said, and as he spoke stepped forward and passed through the main entrance into the temple itself. We then became living actors and at the same time observers of the following experience. We passed into the main part of the temple and proceeded toward the inner sanctuary. The high priest came directly up to us and seemed to know me. "This priest of ancient days," Saint Germain explained, "is now your son." A lesser priest appeared, whom I immediately felt I knew, and he remarked, "The assisting priest was yourself." We entered the inner sanctuary and saw the Vestal Virgin guarding the sacred fire. She, whom I now beheld, was Lotus, my beloved twin ray, whom I met and married some years ago, and who is the mother of our son. The scene changed, and we saw a visiting prince from a distant province plan to seize the Vestal Virgin for his bride. All seemed to go well until the high priest was shown a vision of what was about to take place. It disturbed him, but he kept his own counsel. Standing guard as the slaves of the prince entered, he watched them approach the sanctuary. As they came nearer, he stepped forward and spoke but one word that meant, "Stop." One slave, bolder than the rest, came on. The higher priest warned him back, but still he came nearer. When he reached a certain sacred circle of force which emanated from the altar, the priest no longer hesitated. He stepped to the outer edge of that protecting radiance, raised his right hand, and pointed directly at the slave. A flash of flame shot forth like lightning, and the slave fell lifeless to the floor. The prince, who was watching, came forward in an insane rage. "Stop!" commanded the priest again in a voice like a clap of thunder. The prince hesitated for a moment, stunned by the very power of the word, and the priest continued, "Listen to me. You shall not desecrate the highest of God's gifts to the temple of life. Begone, before you follow the example of your too brazen and misdirected slave." The high priest was fully conscious of the power he could wield as he stood watching the prince. He was the very embodiment of self-control, of illimitable force, consciously held in obedience to his will. He was majesty, crowned with eternal power. The will of the prince was powerful also, but he had no control over himself, and as another wave of blind rage swept over him, when he found himself again opposed, and giving full vent to lust, he rushed forward. The priest, quick as a flash, raised his hand. The flame flashed out a second time, and the prince followed the fate of his former slave. Saint Germain turned to me and explained the experience still further. "You see," he began, "this is the way the quality within every force reacts upon the one who sends it out. The prince and his slave came with the qualities of hate, selfishness, and depravity within their feelings, and when the priest directed the force of which he was the master toward them, it took on their qualities the moment it touched their auras. He merely turned their own feelings and selfishness back upon themselves. The priest, in his unselfish effort to protect another, was himself also protected." That incident closed. The scene of splendor vanished, and again we stood amidst the temple ruins. Saint Germain revealed still more to me, which may not be recorded here. There is only one way, he went on, to avoid the cosmic wheel of cause and effect, the necessity for re-embodiment, and that is through the conscious effort to comprehend the law of life. One must earnestly seek the God within, make permanent conscious contact with that inner self, and hold firmly to it in the face of every condition in the outer life. It will be my pleasure and privilege to show you more, but only for the instruction it will bring to yourself and others. Come, we must now return. As we came near my body, he instructed again. Watch the circle of white flame disappear. I looked. It vanished. A moment later I was back in my body. The sun was sinking, and I knew it would be nearly midnight by the time we arrived home. Place your arm about my shoulder, said Saint Germain, and close your eyes. I felt my body lifted from the ground, but I was not particularly conscious of moving forward. Presently my feet touched the floor, and opening my eyes, I stood in the lodge. Saint Germain was greatly amused when I asked how it was that we could come back in this manner without attracting the attention of the people about us, and he answered, We many times draw about our bodies the cloak of invisibility when moving among those in physical form, and the next second he was gone. I had heard of the great ascended masters who could take their bodies with them wherever they go, and manifest or bring into visibility anything they desire to use direct from the universal. However, to experience actual contact with one of them was a very different thing, and I tried to realize in full the marvel of the experience. To Saint Germain it was evidently a most ordinary occurrence. I sat in quiet contemplation for a long time, in deep, deep gratitude, trying to comprehend and to fully realize his explanation of the law concerning desire. He emphasized its importance and activity as a motive power in the universe, to propel forward new ideas, compelling an expansion of consciousness to take place within the life of every individual. He had explained it by saying, "Constructive desire is the expanding activity within life, for it is only in this way that greater and greater ideas, activity, and accomplishment are pushed through into expression in the outer world of substance and form. Within every right desire is the power of its fulfillment. Man is the Son of God. He is commanded by the Father to choose how he shall direct the life energy, and what quality he wishes his fulfilled desire to express. This he must do, for free will is his birthright. It is the function of the outer activity of the intellect to guide all expansion into constructive channels. This is the purpose and duty of the outer self, to allow the great life or God energy to be used only for the gratification of sense desires, the habit of the mass of mankind, is its destructive use, and is always, without any exception, followed by inharmony, weakness, failure, and destruction. The constructive use of desire is the conscious direction of this limitless God energy by wisdom. All desire, directed by wisdom, carries some kind of blessing to the rest of creation. All desire, directed by the God within, goes forth with the feeling of love, and blesses always. The next few days I spent writing this record of my experiences. Then one morning, on awakening, I found a golden card lying on the table near my couch. It looked like a piece of metallic gold, and on it, in beautiful shaded script of a lovely violet color, was just one short sentence: "Be at our trysting place on the mountain at 7 in the morning. Signed, Saint Germain." I put this card away carefully, and could scarcely wait the intervening time, so great was my expectancy. Early the next morning, while preparing a lunch, there came a distinct impulse not to take anything with me. I obeyed, and decided to trust that my needs would be supplied directly from the universal. Light of heart, I was soon on my way, determined not to miss any opportunity to ask questions, if permitted. As I approached the appointed place, my body became lighter and lighter, until by the time I was within a quarter of a mile, my feet scarcely touched the ground. There was no one in sight, so I sat down on a log to wait for Saint Germain, feeling no fatigue whatsoever, although my hike had been about 10 miles. As I contemplated the wonderful privilege and blessing that had come to me, I heard a twig crack, and looked around expecting to see him. Imagine my surprise when not 50 feet away I saw a panther slowly approaching. My hair must have stood on end. I wanted to run, to scream, anything, so frantic was the feeling of fear within me. would have been useless to move, for one spring from the panther would have been fatal to me. My brain whirled, so great was my fear. But one idea came through clearly and held my attention steady. I realized that I had the mighty presence of God right within me, and that this presence was all love. This beautiful animal was a part of God's life also, and I made myself look at it directly in the eyes. Then came the thought that one part of God could not harm another part. I was conscious of this fact only. A feeling of love swept over me and went out like a ray of light directed to the panther, and with it went my fear. The stealthy tread ceased, and I moved slowly toward it, feeling that God's love filled us both. The vicious glare in the eyes softened, the animal straightened up, and came slowly to me, rubbing its shoulder against my leg. I reached down and stroked the soft head. It looked up into my eyes for a moment, and then lay down and rolled over like a playful kitten. The fur was beautiful, dark, reddish brown. The body long, supple, and of great strength. I continued to play with it, and when I suddenly looked up, Saint Germain stood beside me. "My son," he said, "I saw the great strength within you, or I would not have permitted so great a test. You have conquered fear. My congratulations. Had you not conquered the outer self, I would not have allowed the panther to harm you, but our association would have ceased for a time. I did not have anything to do with the panther being there. It was part of the inner operation of the great law. As you will see before the association with your newfound friend ceases. Now that you have passed the test of courage, it is possible for me to give much greater assistance. Each day you will become stronger, happier, and express much greater freedom." He held out his hand, and in a moment there appeared 4 little cakes of a beautiful golden brown, each about 2 inches square. He offered these, and I ate them at his direction. They were most delicious. Immediately I felt a quickening, tingling sensation through my entire body, a new sense of health and clearness of mind. Saint Germain seated himself beside me, and my instruction began. Chapter 2. The Sahara Desert. Instead of going forth from the body, as in your recent experience, today we will use the projected consciousness, he remarked, as he placed the thumb of his right hand between my eyes and the rest of his fingers over the top of my head. A feeling like a powerful electric current passed over my entire body. Removing his hand, he continued, "I wish you to fix firmly in mind and recall frequently for contemplation the fact that the laws I explain and teach you to use are to bring you into a condition of conscious mastery over all forces and things on earth. This means that no matter what is being experienced, you are always at every instant in complete conscious control of your own mind and body, and able to use your own free will at all times. In this state of projected consciousness, you are completely conscious and have full mastery over all your faculties every instant. There is nothing whatsoever about any of this instruction and its use that is either of the trance or hypnotic condition at any time. For in both trance and hypnosis, the experiencing individual's conscious will is not functioning, which is a most dangerous and disastrous activity to anyone who permits it to take place in his mind and body. There is no conscious mastery or dominion in trance or hypnotic practices, and they are most destructive and dangerous to the soul growth of the one who permits such practice. Please understand thoroughly that the conscious control, mastery, and use of the forces and things on this earth should at all times be under the direction of your inner or God self, through the perfect cooperation and obedience of all outer faculties in both mind and body to that inner guidance. There is no such thing as mastery without this, and those known as the Ascended Masters never intrude any activity upon the God-given prerogative of the individual's free will. A student may be given the experience of projection if an Ascended Master choose to expand his consciousness temporarily so that he experiences things happening in two or more places at the same time. In such a condition, the student's faculties are completely under the control and direction of his own free will at every moment. He is fully conscious and active where his body may be, and also at the place to which the Ascended Master chooses to direct his attention for the instruction. The reason an Ascended Master temporarily raises the consciousness of the student is to show him how he may do this same thing for himself by his own effort consciously and at will. Projected consciousness is but increasing the rate of vibration of the atomic structure in both the mind and body of the student. This is done by the radiation from an Ascended Master, and is an activity of the light which increases the vibratory rate up to the keynote he sets for the experience. In the higher rate, one uses his faculties of sight and hearing exactly as he does in daily life, except that they are expanded into the next octave or zone above the human. Such use of our senses is the same as we experience every moment of the waking state, because we can become aware of that which is near and that which is distant at exactly the same instant. The expansion or contraction of our consciousness is dependent entirely upon what the individual desires. This is always subject to the free will and conscious direction of the student. One can, of his own choice, be conscious of a certain tree in his garden, or of the entire garden. He uses the same faculty of sight to observe both, and uses it in exactly the same way. When he wants to see all of the garden, he makes his sight enlarge its activity until it takes in all he desires. The larger expansion still includes the smaller. So you see, you must be conscious of the full control of all your faculties in both places at the same time. The activity that takes place is really an enlargement of the force field in which the sight acts. The use of your faculty of sight in this projection or expansion of consciousness is accomplished by the raising of the vibratory rate in the optic nerve. The whole process corresponds to the thing that takes place when one uses a field or marine glass. In ordinary experience, human consciousness has been accustomed to use its faculties only within certain zones or force fields. And the proof of this is that one can listen to the sound of a person's voice who is physically present in the room speaking to him, and one can also hear the bell of a telephone ring somewhere else in the house at identically the same instant. All the faculties of the outer activity are elastic. They may be used as either a microscope or a telescope, depending entirely upon the desire and will of the individual. If one can be conscious of sound in the room in which his physical body stands, and also be aware of sound 2 or 3 rooms distant by exactly the same process, in a still farther expansion of this faculty, he can hear at a more distant place. To do this, one must increase the vibratory rate until it reaches into the more distant zone. when you contemplate this great inner God activity? Do you not see how perfectly and readily the outer senses merge into the inner? And what has been two becomes one. This activity of consciousness can be applied to all the other senses, as well as those of sight and hearing. Such a raising process is natural, normal, and harmonious, as simple as the tuning of your radios to any desired wavelength. Radio wavelengths and those of sight and hearing are part of the same activity. Sound contains color, color contains sound. In ordinary daily experience, human beings can hear color and see sound whenever they become still enough. Within certain octaves or zones, vibration registers upon the nerves of the eyes, and the result is what we call sight. Others register upon the nerves of the ears, and the result is what we call hearing. The average person's eyes see only objects whose vibratory rate comes within these certain octaves, for they do not see below the infrared or above the ultraviolet ray or zone. Through the radiation of an ascended master, the atomic structure of the brain and eye vibrates fast enough to expand into the next octave above the human. This same activity can be expanded several octaves further, either by the master's radiation or at the command of the inner or God self of the individual. Many persons do have such experiences involuntarily, but rarely understand what they mean or how they come about. In cases where individuals have had moments of transcendent consciousness or being highly inspired, this is what has occurred, although they seldom recognize the assistance they have been given. Projected consciousness or vision has nothing whatsoever to do with mental pictures produced by suggestions that exist only in the minds of other human beings. Such thoughts and pictures are but flashed directly into the mind of another person by the one sending the suggestion. It is the same activity that takes place when one reflects the image of the sun into a mirror and then deflects it upon the wall. Suggestion is as different from projected consciousness as thinking about a place is different from being physically present. Projection is vivid, living, real, as when your physical body is going through an experience. For it is the action of your inner God self, with whom the Ascended Master is one, the Supreme. Saint Germain and I then became observers and actors in a scene of long ago. Again I was outwardly conscious of going through experiences shown me in thought, feeling, and action. The entire operation was as natural and normal as breathing, and the only unusual sensation about it was the feeling of greater freedom and a sense of dominion. We both became very still for a few moments, as he revivified the etheric records, and my instruction began. This is the Sahara Desert, he said, when it was fertile country, having a semi-tropical climate. There were many streams of water carrying abundant moisture everywhere in the land. In the midst of this empire lay the capital, famous throughout the world for its splendor. The executive buildings were placed in the center upon a slight elevation, and from these the city itself extended equally in every direction. This civilization, he went on, rose to its apex 70,000 years ago. We entered the city and felt an unusual rhythmic activity that gave one a strange sensation of lightness while walking. The people all moved about with great ease and grace. I asked Saint Germain the reason for this, and he replied, "These people remembered their source and knew themselves as sons of God, hence were the possessors and operators of power and wisdom that to you may seem miraculous and superhuman. Truthfully speaking, there are no such things as miracles, for all is according to law, and that which seems miraculous to the present concept of humanity is but the result of application of laws to which mankind's present consciousness is unaccustomed, and so seems strange and unusual. When the reality of life is correctly understood, all manifestation that seems miraculous to your present consciousness is found to be just as natural and normal an experience as the forming of words are to one who has learned the use of the alphabet. It is all the action of an ever-expanding, ever-progressing manifestation of life in form, and this comes about at all times through an orderly process of law, in love and peace. No matter how strange, unusual, and impossible an experience seems to humanity's present mental state, it is no proof that there is not a greater law and a wiser intelligence acting to produce greater wonders of creation surrounding us all the time. The knowledge of the greatest minds of humanity in the outer world today is to this great inner wisdom and power as the understanding of a small child is to the study of calculus. In one building of the central group, we found the attendants attired in the most gorgeous fabrics of soft, radiant colors that harmonized with the interior decoration. One of these acted as guide, taking us to the central building, and there he presented us to the king of this great people. The king proved to be Saint Germain. Beside him stood a young girl, very beautiful. She had hair like spun gold that hung almost to the floor, and eyes of a piercing violet blue. Her entire bearing was one of loving command. I looked inquiringly at Saint Germain, wondering who she could be, and he answered, "Lotus." Beside her stood a young man about 20 years of age, and a lad perhaps 14. The young man was he whom we had seen as the high priest in the temple of Luxor, and the lad was the lesser priest. These were the children of the king. Again, we four were working together. "With this glimpse of former lives," he said, "let us enter into the activity of that blessed people. I say blessed advisedly, and you will soon see why. The majority of them still retained the full conscious use of all their wisdom and power as sons of God, and this they wielded almost without limit, knowing full well from whence they sprang, and to what they were heirs. The outer was but the instrument of the divine self, as it should be, and was only permitted to do that for which it was created. Naturally, the great inner self could act unfettered, and, of course, the perfection and activity of that period was one of magnificent accomplishment. At the time of this former civilization, the whole empire was filled with great peace, happiness, and prosperity. The king-emperor was a master of the ancient wisdom and a real cupbearer of the light. He ruled by that light, and his empire was the living example of perfection. For hundreds of years, Saint Germain continued, this perfection was maintained without army or navy of any kind. The control of the people was vested in the care of 14 ascended masters of light, 2 working on each of the 7 rays. They thus formed points of focus for the mighty God activity to be made visible. Under these 14 luminous beings were 14 lesser masters, who formed the heads of 7 departments, controlling the activities of science, industry, and art. Each of the department heads guided the work under his care by conscious and direct contact with the God in himself. Hence, direct from their source did all direction and instruction come for those under them. Thus, divine perfection was constantly flowing through without any interference from the human. This form of government was most remarkable, successful, and satisfactory in every way. There has never been anything on earth since that time which has even approached such heights. In the ancient records that have come down to the present day, this former civilization is always referred to as the Golden Age, and so it was in every activity of life. In your beloved America, in the not-so-far distant future, will come forth a similar recognition of the real inner self, and this her people will express in high attainment. She is a land of light, and her light shall blaze forth, brilliant as the sun at noonday, among the nations of the earth. She was a land of great light ages ago, and will again come into her spiritual heritage, for nothing can prevent it. She is strong within her own mind and body, stronger than you think, and that strength she will exert to rise out of and throw off from border to border all that weighs heavily upon her at the present time. America has a destiny of great import to the other nations of the earth, and those who have watched over her for centuries still watch. Through their protection and love, she shall fulfill that destiny. America, we, the ascended host of light, love and guard you. America, we love you. A similar form of perfect government will come at a later period, when you have cast off certain fetters within that hang like fungi and sap your strength as a vampire. Beloved ones in America, be not discouraged. When the seeming dark clouds hang low, every one of them shall show you its golden lining. Back of the cloud that seems to threaten is the crystal pure light of God, and his messengers, the ascended masters of love and perfection, watching over America, the government and her people. Again I say, America, we love you. One by one, great awakened souls are coming forth, who will become clearly conscious of their own mighty inherent God power. And such as these will be placed in all official positions of the government. They will be more interested in the welfare of America than in their own personal ambitions and private fortunes. Thus will another golden age reign upon earth and be maintained for an aeon. In the period just preceding this, which you have been experiencing, the mass of the people used great airships for transportation purposes. As the development reached a still higher point, they had little need for them, except in the outlying districts. All the official class, because they were the more spiritually advanced souls of that race, were able to go from place to place in the finer bodies and do all they desired, the same as in your recent experience at Luxor. They also were able to transport the physical body at will, for the use of their power to overcome gravity was as natural as breathing is to you. Gold was a common commodity in this age, as in all golden ages, because its natural emanation is a purifying, balancing, and vitalizing energy of force. It is placed within the earth by the lords of creation, those great beings of light and love, who create and direct worlds, systems of worlds, and the expansion of the light in the beings upon them. The outer mind or intellectual knowledge of humanity holds within it little, very little, understanding of the real purpose for which gold exists on this planet. It grows within the earth like a plant, and through it there is constantly pouring a purifying, vitalizing, and balancing current of energy into the very ground we walk upon, as well as into the growth of nature and the atmosphere we breathe. Gold is placed upon this planet for a variety of uses, two of its most trivial and unimportant ones being that of using gold as a means of exchange and for ornamentation. The far greater activity and purpose of it, within and upon the earth, is the release of its own inherent quality and energy to purify, vitalize, and balance the atomic structure of the world. The scientific world today has no inkling as yet of this activity. However, it serves the same purpose to our earth that radiators do to your homes. Gold is one of the most important ways by which the energy from our sun is supplied to the interior of the earth, and a balance of activities maintained. As a conveyor of this energy, it acts as a transformer to pass the sun's force into the physical substance of our world, as well as to the life evolving upon it. The energy within gold is really a radiant electronic force from the sun, acting in a lower octave. Gold is sometimes called a precipitated sun ray. As the energy within gold is of an extremely high vibratory rate, it can only act upon the finer and more subtle expressions of life through absorption. In all golden ages, this metal comes into plentiful and common use by the mass of the people, and whenever such a condition occurs, the spiritual development of that people reaches a very high state. In these ages, the gold is never hoarded, but instead is widely distributed into the use of the mass, who, absorbing its purifying energy, are themselves raised into greater perfection. Such is the right use of gold, and when this law is consciously understood and obeyed, the individual may draw any quantity he desires to himself by the use of that law. Because of the gold deposits in all mountain ranges, one finds health and vigor in life upon the mountains that he cannot find in any other place on the earth's surface. No one ever heard of detrimental effects coming to those who constantly handle pure gold. While in its pure state it is soft and wears away easily, still that very quality is a fulfilling of this purpose of which I have just spoken. The more advanced of these people produced much gold by precipitation, direct from the universal. The domes of many buildings were covered with sheets of pure gold, and the interior decorated with brilliant jewels in curious yet marvelous designs. These jewels were also precipitated, direct from the one eternal substance. As in all ages past, there was a portion of the people who became more interested in the temporary pleasures of the senses than in the larger creative plan of the great God Self. This caused them to lose consciousness of the God power throughout the land, until it remained active in little more than the city itself. The capital was called the City of the Sun. Those governing realized they must withdraw and let the people learn through hard experience that all their happiness and good came from the adoration to the God within, and they must come back into the light if they were to be happy. The King Emperor, through the inner wisdom, seeing that the people were becoming still more deeply enmeshed in the sense gratification, realized that it was no longer the divine plan to further sustain the kingdom. He was instructed by those of greater spiritual authority than himself to give a banquet announcing his decision to withdraw, and thus bid his subjects farewell. He called the councillors together and gave directions for the banquet, ordering it held in the most magnificent place of the empire, known as the Jeweled Room in the king's palace. This was lighted by self-luminous globes that emitted a brilliant white radiance. They were suspended from the ceiling by chains of crystal. While the light within was intense and brilliant, yet it had an extremely soothing effect upon the body, giving those in its radiance a sense of great ease and calm. The light from the central globe set the jewels ablaze in the sunburst design that formed the great medallion in the middle of the ceiling. The large banquet hall was elaborately decorated and set with 24 white onyx tables, each seating 24 guests. This was the first occasion upon which all the king's councillors and their staffs were to be his guests at the same time. The announcement of the banquet caused much comment among the people, who discussed it thoroughly, each with his neighbour, but to all it was a mystery, for none was able to discern its purpose. The evening of the event came at last. No one suspected the sorrow within the heart of the noble ruler, nor did they dream of the change so soon to come upon them. The hour arrived, the guests assembled, and every one breathed mystery. The great bronze doors to the banquet hall swung majestically open, and a burst of transcendent music, as if played by a gigantic symphony in the invisible, came forth, surprising even those who knew the tremendous power of their adored monarch. He was looked upon almost like a god by the people, so great was their love and admiration for the wisdom and help he constantly poured out to them. As the triumphal music ceased, the king entered, accompanied by his children. The girl was a vision of loveliness. She wore a gown of soft golden fabric, unlike any material of our modern world. The overdrape appeared as if covered with diamonds, for with every movement of her body points of light flashed forth. The golden hair, falling over her shoulders, was caught with 2 emerald clasps. On her forehead was a single band of white metal set with diamonds. In the center was what appeared to be a large diamond, but was really a powerful condensation of light, focused and maintained there by her father. The king was the only one in the whole empire who was entrusted with the use of such transcendent power. The royal family had never used these jewels of light in their contact with the outer world until that night. Such use of this power was only permitted in their private worship of the great God Self, of whose supreme presence they were keenly and constantly aware. The ruler and his 2 sons wore form-fitting garments of the same soft golden fabric as the daughter. These were as pliable as leather, but made of metallic gold with breastplates like a great sun of jewels. They wore sandals of the same material, also set with precious stones, and the wonderful jewel of light rested upon the forehead of each. The king gave a signal, and the assembled guests were seated. In a voice majestic and powerful, he poured out an invocation from the depths of his heart to that infinite, supreme one. O thou mighty, omnipresent source, thou who dost govern the universe, the flame in each human heart, we give love, praise, and gratitude unto thee for thine own life, light, and love in all things. We adore thee, and look only unto thee, the presence in all things, visible and invisible, evolved and unevolved, thou ceaselessly flowing stream of life, who doth forever pour thyself into all creation, the one self in all. My heart calls unto thee as never before to arouse these, my people, to their danger, for of late indifference to thee is creeping over them like a poisonous breath, producing a soul sleep, and drawing a veil before them that shuts out thy shining presence. If they must have the experience that consumes and burns away the dross and clouds of the outer self, then do thou sustain, and at last bring them forth in thy eternal perfection. I call unto thee, thou Creator of the universe, thou supreme, omnipotent God. The king took his seat, and all waited in silent expectation. In a few moments, the service for each individual appeared before him. Course after course was served as if by unseen hands, the food coming in marvelous crystal and jeweled containers, then disappearing as soon as the course was finished, followed immediately by the succeeding one. Finally, the most elaborate banquet the empire had ever known came to an end. All was silence again, as if in breathless expectancy, anticipating some most unusual occurrence. The king arose and stood a few moments calmly waiting. Soon a crystal goblet appeared at the right hand of each guest. These were filled with a condensation of pure electronic essence, and for all who drank it, no matter how far down the ages his life stream extended, or how varied his experiences, he never could completely forget the God Self within. This soul protection was granted to those at the banquet as a reward for their faith and loyalty to the God in themselves, the king and the empire. The counselors and those present had served sincerely and continuously for the good of the empire, and for that service soul protection through the centuries was given to them. Each lifted his goblet and drank to the God in himself, to his own flame of the Most High Living One. The proceedings of the banquet were broadcast to everyone in the empire through a radio similar to that which we use today. It was no larger than a dinner plate, yet powerful enough to receive what was happening at any point on the earth's surface. After the salutation to the divine self in each, all became very still. The atmosphere itself seemed perfectly motionless. In a few moments, a wondrous presence slowly became visible in front of the king. That presence was a cosmic master from out the great silence. A murmur of awe and surprise passed over the assembled guests at his appearance, as they recognized in amazement one of whom they had heard for many centuries, yet whose visible presence none had ever seen. Raising his right hand, he addressed those present and all dwelling within the empire. O children of earth, I bring you a warning of serious import at a time of great crisis. Arouse yourselves from the snare of the senses that is engulfing you. Awake from your lethargy before it is too late. This, my brother of light, must withdraw and leave you to the experience that you have chosen, and which is slowly enticing you into its many pitfalls. You have opened yourselves to the uncontrolled ignorance and emotions of the outer self. You give little attention, and still less adoration, to your source, the supreme, the mighty, the radiant, the majestic, the infinite cause of all that is, the creator and sustainer of all worlds. You give no gratitude to the great glorious presence, the Lord of love, for the very life by which you exist. Oh, why are you not even grateful for the blessings nature pours out so lavishly, for the abundance that comes to you through this fair land, and from your own wise and unselfish ruler? You thank each others for favors, the things of the senses and form that are so ephemeral, that pass from one to another and then are no more. But why, oh why, do you forget the source of all life, all love, all intelligence, all power? People, oh people, where is your gratitude to life, for love, for the magnificence of experience that you enjoy every moment, every hour, every day, year after year? All this you call your own, but it has always belonged, does now, and always will belong to the one great source of life, light, love, and all good, God, the Supreme, the Adorable, the all-pervading One. When by your own misuse of the energy of life, which this all-pervading One showers upon you constantly, pure, perfect, and uncontaminated, you have created conditions so destructive and painful that they can no longer be endured. You turn in either desperation, agony, or rebellion, and call upon God for relief from your misery. This is your offering to the Giver of all good, in return for that ceaseless perfection which He continually bestows in supreme love. The only condition upon which the one great Self gives all is its right use, that it may bless the rest of creation with infinite joy, harmonious activity, and perfection. When in the depths of misery you turn again to your source for relief from your misdeeds, you either cry in the agony of despair, or, if rebellious, blame life and the source of all good for allowing what you call injustice and wrong conditions to exist in you and your world. It is you, the little personal self, who are unjust to life. You who are unfair. You who create the misery of earth. For only humanity, because it has free will to create as it chooses, each individual through his own thought and feeling dares to bring into existence the discord, misery, and deformity that express upon earth. This is a blight upon creation, and the perfection that forever swings in the great cosmic melody of eternal song. Only mankind is guilty of making a discord in the music of the spheres, where all else lives and acts in accordance with the law of love, of life, of harmony, and of light. All else blends into the harmonious whole, the body of the infinite all-loving One. All other realms of life and light move and create according to the fundamental principle upon which all perfection rests. That principle is love. If it were not for the great selfless ones like your ruler, the great host of ascended masters, whose very keynote of existence is love, humanity would long ago have destroyed itself and the very planet upon which it exists. The transcendent and magnificent activities of love and light are the natural conditions in which God created and expected His human children to manifest, obeying His command to love. There is no such thing as a supernatural condition anywhere in the universe. All that is transcendent, beautiful, and perfect is natural, and according to the law of love. Anything other than that is subnatural. The daily experience of the host of ascended masters is the perfection God's children were meant to live in always. Earth's children did express this perfection once in a former cycle, which was one golden age. That former civilization, that ancient perfection, is older than you dream, older than you believe the planet to be. All mankind at that period lived in a similar transcendent state as the ascended masters. The condition of misery that has followed since that time down through the ages came about because mankind chose to look away from its source, love, as the plan by which to live life. When the children of earth look away from love, they are deliberately and consciously choosing the experience of chaos. Whoever seeks to exist without love cannot survive long anywhere in creation. Such efforts are bound to bring failure, misery, and dissolution. Whatever lacks love must return to chaos, the unformed, so its substance may be used over again in combination with love, and thus produce a new and perfect form. This is the law of universal as well as individual life. It is immutable, irrevocable, eternal, yet beneficent, for creation in form exists that God may have something upon which to pour out love and so express in action. This is the law of the Mighty One from which all else proceeds. It is the mandate of eternity, and the vastness and brilliance of that perfection cannot be described in words. If there were not these actual, real, permanent, and perfect conditions of life and experience, which far transcend human description, existence would be but a travesty upon the stupendous activity of life that swings forever throughout creation. There are those higher, harmonious, transcendent spheres, realms of activity and consciousness, individual and cosmic, where creation goes on continually in joy, in love, in freedom, and in perfection. These are real, and much more permanent than your bodies and buildings in the physical world about you. These realms of life are created of substance which is so charged with love that they can never have a quality or activity of discord, imperfection, or disintegration imposed upon them or registered within them. Because they are based upon love, the perfection of such a manifestation is forever maintained, ever active, ever expanding, ever blessing with joy all that exists. You bring woe upon yourselves, which propels you into embodiment again and again in the ignorance of the senses, the human appetites and desires of the outer self. These appetites in the feeling nature of mankind are in themselves but an accumulation of energy, which the individual through his thought and feeling has given a quality of one kind or another. This misqualified energy gathers a momentum through human expression and becomes habit. Habit is but energy specifically qualified and held focused for a time upon one objective. The sense appetites of former lives become the driving forces and habits of the succeeding ones, keeping you slaves, bound to the chariot wheels of discord, lack, and necessity, whirling you through a maze of human problems and experiences of your own creation, compelling you to learn and obey the law of the One, love. Your own miscreations drive you on and on and on, until you are willing to understand life and obey its one law, love. You whirl through life after life, experiencing discord upon discord, until you do learn to live the law of love. This is a compelling activity which none escape, and it continues until the outer self asks the reason for its misery, and understands that its release from the experience of suffering can only come through obedience to the one law of love. Such obedience begins as calm, peace, and kindliness in the feelings whose center is in the heart. Its contact with the outer world must come through the inner feeling. Love is not an activity of the mind, but is the pure and luminous essence which creates mind. This essence from the great God flame streams into substance and constantly pours itself out as perfection in form and action. Love is perfection manifest. It can only express peace, joy, and an outpouring of those feelings to all creation unconditionally. It asks nothing for itself, because it is eternally self-creating, being the heartbeat of the Supreme. Love owns all, and is only concerned with setting the plan of perfection into action in all. Thus, it is a constant pouring out of itself. It takes no cognizance of what has been given in the past, but receives its joy and maintains its balance by the continual outstreaming of itself. Because this perfection is within love, forever flowing forth, it is incapable of recording anything but itself. Love alone is the basis of harmony and the right use of all life. In human experience, this grows into a desire to give and give and give of all the individual's peace and harmony under the rest of creation. People, oh people, forever throughout the ages, only enough love can bring you back to the heaven you once knew and abided in. Here you will once again embrace the fullness of the great light that gives all through love. A visiting prince approaches your borders. He will enter this city seeking the daughter of your king. You will come under the rule of this prince, but the recognition of your mistake will be futile. Nothing can avail, for the royal family will be drawn into the protection and care of those whose power and authority are of God, and against whom no human desire can ever prevail. These are the great ascended masters of light from the golden etheric city over this land. Here your ruler and his beloved children will abide for a cycle of time. Turning to the king, he addressed him, saying, I bless you, my noble, patient brother. Loving and selfless has been the service to your people. Deep and eternal is your devotion to the Supreme One, the source of all creation. The golden etheric city awaits and joyously welcomes you and your children. Within its radiance you will live, serving through the rays of light which are forever streaming out from those who dwell therein, until these your people shall redeem themselves by obedience to the law of love. This empire of light exists over the land you have loved so well. It is composed of self-luminous etheric substance and rests above the physical city which is your capital. It is real, very real, and much more permanent than any earthly city, for light is indestructible, and the golden city is made of light. Into it no inharmonious thought or disturbing condition of any kind can ever enter. I will return in 7 days to take you and your children into the city of light, where we shall watch the progress of humanity and draw into the light all who will discipline and make themselves ready. Encircling the city is an invincible belt of electronic force through which it is impossible for anything uninvited to pass. When he had finished speaking, he blessed the royal family, the guests, and the empire. And in the moments of silence that followed, his light and the outline of his body within it grew fainter and fainter until it disappeared entirely. A murmur passed through the great banquet hall, and as all looked toward the king, his head was bowed in reverent silence. Then he slowly arose and bade his guests good night. On the 7th day, the brother from out the silence returned, and enfolding the king and his children within his own blazing aura, withdrew into the golden etheric city of light. The visiting prince arrived the next day, discovered the condition of the empire and the consternation that still held sway over its people. He at once subtly planned to become its ruler. This he accomplished without opposition. 2,000 years later, most of that empire had become barren land. The streams dried up, and desolation stretched everywhere. All the result of the discord and selfishness of mankind, and the blight it becomes upon the growth of plant life in nature. This kingdom had extended the entire width of Africa on east until it reached the Himalayan mountains. There followed a great cataclysm, submerging all the land. Through that change, an inner sea was formed where the Sahara Desert now lies. Another earth change, which took place about 12,000 years ago, drained this sea, and a part of it later became the present Sahara Desert. The river Nile, as it is today, most nearly resembles the beautiful streams of that long-forgotten period. Thus ended our observation of those very ancient scenes. I could hardly believe my senses. I was so astonished at the way the experiences of the past were revivified, pictures projected in all three dimensions, and the activity of the people in that remote age portrayed. Realizing how surprised and unaccustomed to such activities I was, Saint Germain promised to take me to the physical records of that period and its people, and give me physical proof that it was not a vision conjured up by him. Glancing around from the log upon which we were seated, we saw the panther lying nearby, fast asleep. Saint Germain took up the explanation of several important phases on the application of higher laws, for the manifesting of one's own inherent dominion over the things of the sense world. This led to how he was able to express such youth and perfection in a body so old, according to the way human beings count time. Eternal youth, he explained, is the flame of God abiding in the body of man, the Father's gift of himself to his creation. Youth and beauty of both mind and body can only be kept permanently by those individuals who are strong enough to shut out discord, and whosoever does that can and will express perfection and maintain it. Where peace, love, and light do not abide within the thoughts and feelings of a human being, no amount of physical effort can possibly keep the outer self expressing youth and beauty. These exist eternally within the God flame, which is the divine self of every individual. Whatever discord the outer self allows to flash through the thought and feeling is that instant stamped upon the flesh of the physical body. Eternal youth and beauty are self-created and forever self-existent within the flame of God's life in every human being. This is God's plan for manifesting his perfection into the world of form and maintaining it forever. Youth, beauty, and perfection are attributes of love, which the God Self is continually pouring forth into its creation. Within each individual is placed the power and means for maintaining and increasing that perfect, ever-expanding activity of creation. The power of accomplishment is the energy of the God Self in each human being born into the world. It is always active every moment in your mind, body, and world. There is no instant in which this mighty energy is not flowing through all individuals. You are privileged to qualify it as you please at the command of your own free will, through consciously directed thought and feeling. Thought is the only thing in the universe that can create vibration, and through vibration you qualify this ever-flowing energy with whatever you desire to have manifest in your life and world. This limitless, intelligent, radiant energy is flowing ceaselessly through your nervous system, and is the eternal life and vitality in the bloodstream coursing through your veins. It is an all-powerful, omnipresent, intelligent activity given you by the Father, the God principle of life, to be consciously directed according to your free will. Real intelligence, which uses everything constructively, comes only from within the God principle, the flame of life, and is not merely the activity of the intellect. Real intelligence is wisdom, or God knowledge, and this does not and cannot think wrong thoughts. Wrong thoughts come only from impressions made upon the intellect by the world outside of the individual. If individuals would discriminate between their own thoughts that is, thoughts from within the God flame, and the suggestions thrown off by other people's intellects, and the evidence of the senses, which consider appearances only, they would be able to avoid all discordant activities and conditions in the world of experience. The light from within one's own God flame is the criterion, the standard of perfection, by which all thoughts and feelings that reach us through the five senses should be tested. No one can keep his thoughts and feelings qualified with perfection unless he goes to the source of perfection, for that quality and activity only abide within the God flame. This is the individual's need for meditation upon and communion with the light of God within himself. Pure life essence will not only give and sustain eternal youth and beauty in the body, but will enable you to maintain perfect balance between your God self and the outer or personal self. In fact, this pure life energy is the power which the outer self uses to hold its connection with its divine source, the God self. In reality, these two are one, except when the intellect, or outer activity of the mind, the sense consciousness, accepts imperfection, inharmony, incompleteness, or thinks itself a creation apart from the all-pervading one presence of life. If the sense consciousness thinks itself something separate from God, perfection, then that condition is established unto it. For what the sense consciousness thinks into its world, the world returns to it. When one lets an idea of imperfection or separation from God occupy his attention, and therefore his mind, a condition corresponding to that begins to express itself in his body and world. This causes the person to feel himself an entity apart from his source. The moment he thinks himself separated from God, he thinks his life, intelligence, and power has beginning and end. Life always has been, is now, and always will be. No one can really destroy life. Through various activities in the mental and physical world, form can be disintegrated or temporarily demolished, but the consciousness of the individual is eternal and can control all substance everywhere in manifestation when the God life within is acknowledged as the knower, giver, and doer of all good in creation. I tell you truth when I say there is only one source of all good, God. The conscious recognition and acceptance of this truth, acknowledged by the outer activity of the mind, not 2 or 3 times a day, but every few moments all day long, no matter what the outer self is doing, and this maintained will enable anyone to express his perfect freedom and dominion over all things human. To most people, the above sounds difficult, for they have lived so many centuries in the belief that they are beings apart from God, while every instant of every day they are using God life, God energy, God substance, and God activity in everything they think and do without realizing it. However, it requires the conscious admitting of this fact in the outer activity of the mind and constructive direction to release its full power to the personal self. Recognition, conscious direction, and constructive use of the God energy maintained within oneself at all times is the way of perfection, mastery, and dominion over all things on earth, including the conscious control of all natural forces. The instruction I have been giving you will erase completely all false beliefs, if maintained. The rapidity with which it is accomplished depends upon how continuously, persistently, and deeply you feel and associate with your God self. In the attainment of mastery or adeptship, the conscious control of all force and manipulation of substance are dependent first upon the acknowledgement of your own individual God self, second, upon perfect calmness of feeling under all circumstances, and third, one must be above all temptation of misusing power. The stilling of all emotions at the command of the conscious will is imperative and the demand for it in the adept is unconditional, if dominion is to be attained. It does not mean a repression of discord within oneself at any time, but is a stilling and harmonizing of the feelings, no matter what the circumstances are which surround the mind or body of the student. Such control is not an easy thing for humanity in the Western world, because the temperament of most people in the Occident is sensitive, emotional, and impulsive. This characteristic is energy of tremendous power. It must be controlled, held in reserve, and released only through conscious direction for the accomplishment of something constructive. Until the waste of energy is checked and completely governed, the individual cannot and never will make permanent progress. The student often asks if one reaches a point, while still on the path of attainment, where he rises above the use of affirmation. When an individual sincerely uses affirmation, he brings about a full acceptance of the truth of whatever he affirms, for its use is but to focus the attention of the outer mind so steadily upon the truth that he accepts it fully in his feelings, because feeling is the actual God energy released, which manifests the truth affirmed. The continued use of affirmation brings one to the point where he has such a deep realization of the truth in anything he affirms that he is no longer conscious of it as an affirmation. One uses an affirmation, mantra, or prayer because he desires something made manifest. Right desire is the deepest form of prayer. Thus, by the use of affirmation, the student raises his outer self into the full acceptance of its truth and generates the feeling by which it becomes a thing manifest. In this deep acceptance comes the manifestation, for through concentration, the spoken word begins to cause instantaneous activity. My gratitude to Saint Germain for all I had received was too deep for words. He read my thoughts and feelings as one reads a book, and so we both sat silent for some few moments, in perfect attunement. He roused me from my reverie to watch the gorgeous colors in the western sky, the sunset's afterglow. I wanted to remain on the mountain all night and return home in the morning enjoying the sunrise. I had no sooner felt the desire than a beautiful sleeping bag lay at my feet. It was unlike anything I have ever seen. I reached down to examine the unusual fabric of which it was made, and to my astonishment found it glowing and warm. I looked up, and Saint Germain smilingly extended to me a crystal cup, filled with golden liquid about the consistency of honey. Obedient to his slightest wish, I drank it, and instantly a radiant glow passed through my body. When I had finished, the cup disappeared in my hand. "Oh, why could I not keep this lovely creation?" I asked in surprise. "Patience, my son," he answered. "Are not your desires being fulfilled one by one? Your sleeping bag will remain until daybreak, and your friend the panther will guard you during the night." Bowing slightly, and with a smile that was graciousness itself, his body became gradually indistinct, and then disappeared entirely. I lay down in the lovely bag and was soon fast asleep. As the rosy tints of dawn touched the eastern horizon, I awoke, and the first thought in my mind was concerning the bag, which I had so much enjoyed. With that thought it vanished, back into the universal substance from which it had come. The panther came toward me, and together we turned our footsteps homeward. After walking for some distance, the sound of men's voices caught our ears. The animal sniffed the air, suddenly stopped directly in front of me and looked up. I reached down and, patting it, said, "Now you may go." It bounded away into the thickly wooded section of the mountain to the right of the trail. I continued on my way without further incident, and at last reached my lodgings shortly after noon. in a state of mind hard to find words to describe. I wanted to think, contemplate, digest, and become adjusted to an entirely new set of ideas. The unusual yet very real experiences through which I had passed within the 48 hours just preceding were causing me to reorder my entire world. I was happy in the extreme, and yet it seemed as if another universe had manifested itself around me. There was the same old prosaic world on the outside that I had always known, to be sure. And yet, was it? Within it, all the time had been these wonderful experiences, this tremendous power, these marvelous revelations of freedom and dominion over all manifestation, of which I had been so totally unaware. I had been surrounded all my life by these seeming miracles, to which in my previous years I was as oblivious as if no such thing existed in creation. I thought and thought, deeper and deeper than I had ever contemplated anything before in my whole existence. The dinner hour arrived, but I was not hungry. However, to begin the evening meal, I ordered a glass of milk. It was served, and a few moments later, as I tasted it, imagine my astonishment to find that it had become the same creamy liquid Saint Germain had first given me. I finished the meal, returned home, and was preparing my bath before retiring, when suddenly the familiar electrical signal thrilled me from head to foot. Involuntarily, I held out my hand, and in a few seconds a small cake of crystal-like substance formed in the palm. I somehow knew this was to be put in my bath, and had no more than dropped the substance into the water than it immediately bubbled and sparkled as though alive. I stepped in, and a tingling sensation thrilled every cell in my body. I felt charged with a high-powered electrical current that illumined and strengthened my whole being. My bath finished, I lay down and soon dropped into a dreamless sleep.